My 5-year-old daughter was hiding behind a washing machine at her cousin's birthday party, and when I finally found her, she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks and whispered, "Mommy, do I have to say sorry to Aunt Lorraine?" I want you to sit with that question for a second, because I had to. I sat on that cold laundry room floor for what felt like an eternity, realizing my traumatized, gentle little girl thought she was the one who owed an apology. By the time that afternoon was over, a single photograph would unravel a dark web of lies my in-laws had been protecting for years. My name is Nora, and this is the story of the day I stopped pretending my daughter was safe with the people who shared her blood. 2 years earlier, my world had completely shattered. My husband Dashiell was killed in a sudden construction accident. One minute I was folding laundry on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and the next I was listening to a stranger's rehearsed, clinical voice on the phone telling me my husband wasn't coming home. Dashiell was an incredible father. He was the kind of dad who would build towering block castles even after a grueling day of physical labor, who did custom voices for every bedtime story, and who proudly let Marlowe paint his fingernails glittery blue. When he died, Marlowe was only 3 years old. She was old enough to remember the smell of sawdust and coffee on his jacket, but far too young to understand that those fleeting memories were all she would ever have left of him. After Dashiell's death, Marlowe retreated into a terrifying, silent grief. She flinched at raised voices, clung to my hem in crowded rooms like it was her only anchor, and covered her ears at any sudden noise. I learned to read her like a storm warning, watching the tightening of her small shoulders and the rapid shift in her breathing. My in-laws Bernice and Ambrose had no idea how to handle a grieving child. They weren't necessarily evil people at first. They were just deeply uncomfortable with pain. They loved the convenient, idealized version of a granddaughter, not the complicated, healing child in front of them. Bernice constantly criticized Marlowe's quietness, calling it a character flaw and claiming Dashiell was never this sensitive. My sister-in-law Lorraine was even worse. She had no children of her own and treated Marlowe's profound grief as an annoying disruption to her picture-perfect family events. She would snap her fingers at Marlowe to demand her attention and tell her to use her big girl voice with palpable irritation. Over those 2 years, I noticed Lorraine grabbing Marlowe's wrist a little too tightly when moving her from room to room. Every time I gaslit myself, I told myself I was just being an overprotective, grieving widow. Even when Lorraine violently yanked Marlowe out of her chair during Thanksgiving for spilling cranberry sauce, I swallowed my anger to keep the peace. That compromise was the dangerous lie I lived for 2 years, and it almost cost me everything at my niece Unia's 6th birthday party. The party was held at Bernice and Ambrose's large colonial home near Nashville. The backyard was filled with pink balloons, a massive rented bounce house, and dozens of relatives. Marlowe had been incredibly anxious on the drive over, quietly tracing patterns on the car window. To help her cope, we practiced our secret signal. If things got too overwhelming, she would squeeze my hand twice, and we would quietly slip away to a quiet space. No questions asked. For the first hour, she stayed glued to my side, watching the other children jump with a cautious longing that broke my heart. Then I got pulled into a monotonous conversation with a cousin about home renovations. When I finally looked down, the spot beside me was empty. At first, I didn't panic. I checked the dessert table, the side yard, and the kitchen. Bernice was in the kitchen arranging deviled eggs with absolute precision, barely looking up to wave a hand vaguely toward the living room when I asked if she had seen Marlowe. By the 10-minute mark, my chest went completely tight. I searched the bathrooms, the guest bedrooms, and the front porch. Nothing. As I hurried past the laundry room, I heard a tiny, muffled sob. I pushed the door open and the air left my lungs. Marlowe was wedged into the tight gap beside the washing machine, her yellow dress twisted, her eyes wide with terror, and a vivid red mark blooming across her left cheek. When I dropped to my knees and asked who did this, her lip trembled as she begged me not to be mad. Those words broke something inside me forever. My child flinched when I reached out to hold her. In that fraction of a second, I realized she had just learned what hands could do when driven by malice, and her body couldn't yet differentiate my touch from her attackers. I gathered her shaking body against my chest, holding her tight as my mind flashed back to the hospital room where I had promised a dying Dashiell that I would protect our daughter at all costs. I carried her out into the backyard and the party fell silent in stages, like a radio losing its signal. Lorraine stood near the cake table, a defensive, smug smile already plastered on her face. Bernice held a stack of napkins like a shield, and Ambrose stood by the grill, his jaw set in a way that made it clear he had already chosen a side. I demanded to know who had laid a hand on my daughter. Lorraine rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy sigh of mild inconvenience. She claimed Marlowe had a meltdown, bumped into the cupcake table and started screaming, so she had simply taken her inside to calm down before she ruined the birthday photos. Marlowe buried her face deeper into my neck, her tiny hands gripping my shirt. Bernice rushed over, whispering sharply that this was not the time or place because they had guests. Ambrose chimed in, telling me that kids fall and cry and there was no need to turn a birthday party into an interrogation. I stood there, stunned by their cold indifference, until Lorraine crossed her arms and delivered the final blow. She accused me of coddling Marlowe only because I felt guilty about Dashiell's death. A white-hot rage washed over me. I wanted to smash their perfect cake and scream, but I refused to add more terrifying noise to my daughter's world. I looked them all in the eye, told them we were leaving. And when Bernice tried to grab my arm to stop me from embarrassing the family, I pulled away and told her they had embarrassed themselves. In the car, my hands shook violently as I buckled Marlowe into her seat. She asked if Aunt Lorraine was going to be mad at her, and I promised her she would never have to worry about that woman again. I drove straight toward an urgent care clinic to document the physical abuse. While sitting at a red light, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Roland, Unia's father. He had sent a single photograph with a text apologizing, saying he hadn't noticed it until looking through his camera roll. I opened the photo. It was a picture of the cake table, but in the background, out of focus, was Lorraine. Her hand was raised mid-swing, gripping Marlowe's arm while my daughter tried desperately to shrink away from her. At the clinic, the staff documented the soft tissue bruising on Marlowe's cheek and took official photos for her medical record. The very next morning, I met with a family law attorney and filed a police report. My attorney assured me that the photograph paired with the medical documentation was more than enough to secure an emergency protective order. But the real breakthrough came later that morning. Roland called me, his voice trembling. He remembered that Ambrose had installed a security camera facing the side yard. Roland had secretly accessed the footage before anyone else thought to delete it. The video was horrifying. It clearly showed Lorraine aggressively dragging Marlowe out of sight and striking her across the face. Roland sent me the footage, and after watching it once, I had to sit on the bathroom floor to stop myself from throwing up. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer and the police. The emergency protective order was granted within the week, legally barring Lorraine from any contact with Marlowe. Bernice immediately launched a relentless voicemail campaign, accusing me of destroying the family over a minor incident of Lorraine losing her patience. But my attorney and I discovered something even more sickening when we reviewed the security footage frame by frame. In the corner of the video, Bernice was clearly visible standing at the kitchen window. She had watched the entire assault happen, turned her back, and calmly went back to organizing her deviled eggs. This revelation proved that the family had a long-standing, unspoken agreement to ignore Lorraine's abusive behavior. Roland refused to stay silent too. Appalled by the footage, he began gently questioning his own daughter, Unia. She revealed that Lorraine had frequently grabbed her and hurt her whenever she wasn't obedient or fast enough. Roland immediately filed his own police report and cut Lorraine off completely, sacrificing his standing with the in-laws to protect his child. The rest of the family fractured. Bernice sent venomous messages accusing me of airing private laundry, while Ambrose remained completely silent. However, the truth has a way of rising. A few cousins reached out privately to support me. An older cousin, Georgiana, confessed over coffee that she had stopped bringing her children to family events years ago after her son came home with a similar mark on his arm. She had tried to bring it up to Bernice, only to be told she was too soft. Hearing her words brought a wave of grief. If any of us had spoken up sooner, Marlowe might have been spared that laundry room entirely. During the court hearing to finalize the protective order, Lorraine's lawyer tried to paint me as an unstable, grieving widow. But the moment the Jew